Thank you, Noel, and welcome everyone. Especially welcome our two special guests whom I will introduce in a few minutes. If you are enjoying this presentation this evening and you want to support us, as Noel said, please go to myocn.net so we can continue to deliver the Orthodox Christian message any day, anytime, anywhere in the world. Your help means a great deal. I'm going to begin with a prayer, as we always do, then I'll introduce our guests. Heavenly King and Comforter, the Spirit of truth, everywhere present, filling all things, the treasure of blessings and the giver of life, come and dwell in us, cleanse us of every stain, and save our souls, O gracious one. Tonight we have the privilege of having two wonderful individuals with you. I won't give you their extended background, their extended bio, which is quite significant. I asked you to go to their website and go to our website to see it, but I will highlight just a few things about them. Let me talk about our first guest, Richard Ghazal. Richard is the IDC's, it's in Defense of Christians, Executive Director. He is responsible for the organization's strategic planning, the implementation of policy priorities, and advocacy initiatives in the legislative and executive branches of the government. Richard is a U.S. Air Force judge, he's retired, and an intelligence officer. Nadine Maenza is a noted speaker, writer, policy expert with more than 2 decades of experience as an advocate for working families and a champion for international religious freedom. Nadine is the president of Patriot Voices, where she provides her expertise to shape organizational special emphasis on public policies that support working families. In May of 2020, she was reappointed by the White House to a second 2-year term on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, serving as its vice chair in 2019. She is currently on the board of directors for the Institute for Global Engagement, as well as the Freedom Research Foundation. Like I said, there's a lot more there. I can't do it all tonight, but please go to the website and see how wonderful these people are and how talented they are and what gifts they bring to this most important subject. Richard, let me start off with you. Tell us about these last couple of days. You guys have been very busy there in Washington, D.C.
Certainly has been a busy few days, and Nadine can also attest to that, I'm sure. There was a 3-day conference called the International Religious Freedom Summit, the IRF Summit. It was the first annual summit, in fact, co-chaired by Ambassador Samuel Brownback and Dr. Katrina Lantos Sweat. As I said, it's the first of its kind, but not exactly. For the last 3 years, the U.S. Department of State has been putting on a ministerial, which is almost the same thing, only this year and going forward, the IRF Summit is run by civil society organizations and the like. That's not to say it's going to replace the U.S. State Department's involvement in the ministerial, but it's a nice complement for sure. You had a very, very broad spectrum of different communities, faith communities, advocacy communities, and so on in attendance, and it was really a wonderful program.
And this lasted for 2 days. You had last night, there was an ecumenical prayer service, I understand. And then you had meetings today, right?
That's correct. Yesterday, we did have an ecumenical prayer service. It was co-sponsored by In Defense of Christians and the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. It was held at the St. Sophia Cathedral in Washington, D.C. The particular significance of the location was the fact that it fell on the 1-year anniversary of the conversion of the Hagia Sophia into a mosque, from a museum into a mosque. And the fact that it was at St. Sophia's here in D.C. was very significant. His Eminence, Archbishop Apodopoulos, gave really wonderful remarks about that very theme.
And he grew up in Turkey, so he knows the problems that are faced there in Istanbul. And as you said, Apodopoulos is the new Archbishop here in America. He's now celebrated his 2nd anniversary. And it was really rather disheartening for many of us who are Orthodox Christians. It should be really for Christendom in general, that a cathedral that was there since, I think, 1938 was now reverted into a mosque. And, you know, frankly, the collective world, all they did was yawn. And that's quite a disappointment. But we'll get further into that in a minute. Let's talk about, for a second, before I go to Nadine, your IDC policy priorities for this year.
Yeah, well, let me tell you just a little bit about IDC, just very briefly. IDC was an organization established in 2014, so we're on our 8th year now. It was founded in response to, in the wake of, the ISIS genocide against Christians and Yazidis. The silence was deafening here in the States, as you mentioned, Father. So IDC was a response to that. Since then, IDC was able to work with the federal government and get it recognized officially as a genocide and provide aid through USAID to rebuild the devastated communities in Iraq and Syria, Christians and Yazidis. So that's how we started. Since then, since the so-called territorial defeat of the caliphate, which is still around, but IDC has broadened its mission and mandate to include places like Lebanon, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and we're looking at places like Iran and Saudi Arabia as well. In terms of our policy priorities for 2021, our two top priorities are Save Lebanon and Stop Turkey. As you probably know, Father, and many of your viewers, Lebanon is the last free bastion of Christianity in the Middle East.
Yes.
If Lebanon goes, so go the other Christian communities in the Middle East, Egypt, Syria, Iraq. Egypt, of course, has quite a higher population, but it's only a matter of time until each of the dominoes fall. Second to that, of course, is Stop Turkey, our second policy priority. As you've seen over the last year or so, even more than that, I would say, since 2002, since the Erdogan government really came on board, is Turkey really stepping up its external or foreign affairs type activity. It started off as a no problems with neighbors policy. Now it looks as though it's morphed into a no neighbors without whom we have problems policy. We see it in Syria. We see it in Iraq. We saw it this past fall in Armenia, specifically in Nagorno-Karabakh region. So it's a trend that's just too alarming to ignore. Okay. But of course, next we still maintain focus in Syria, Iraq, Egypt, and other locales with religious minorities.
Before I go to Nadine, and this, Nadine, could be a good, I think, transition into what you might say. I have gone now to Jerusalem, to the Holy Land. I think this is going to be my 13th pilgrimage that's coming up. And I've been there and have been stunned at the proximity of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Blue Mosque, the Western Wall there, and you have the Holy Sepulchre, probably within 200-300 yards of one another, the three heads, the Abrahamic faiths. And there seems to be peace there. There's tension, there's Brussels, there's these scuffles every so often, but it seems to calm. We don't have an active persecution there, do we, that you know of?
In the Holy Land, it's a different sort, I would say. As you say, that each religion has its own piece of the pie of the old city, as you suggest. But that status quo is more of a powder keg that everybody is interested in avoiding detonating. I don't know that it's necessarily a peaceful coexistence, although some may characterize it as such. Mm-hmm. But certainly it's not the open persecution that we witness in other locales throughout the Middle East.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's sort of this peaceful coexistence, which could pop at any moment. Nadine, let me bring you into this. And again, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and have this conversation.
You're, from what I read, uniquely qualified to deal with a lot of these issues. So let me start off with this U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Can you explain that to us, to the average person who really doesn't know what that is?
Sure. So the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom is an independent bipartisan government agency that was set up in 1998 along with the Religious Freedom Office in the State Department with the Ambassador for Religious Freedom. So we were both set up at the same time by this International Religious Freedom Act in 1998. And the really brilliance of setting up USCIRF, the U.S. Commissioner, we go by USCIRF, is we're independent. So what we are is really a watchdog agency to the U.S. government on religious freedom. So we assess religious freedom conditions independently of the rest of the government. We make recommendations to our own government, to the President, Secretary of State, and Congress. And we do a report each year that independently reports on the countries that are the worst offenders of religious freedom. And then we make recommendations on the way the U.S. government should be interacting with these countries to make the situation better. So it's an important part of U.S. policy, and we are laser focused. So we don't, look at the bilateral relationship. You look at countries like Egypt or Turkey, where the U.S. government pretends there's no problems because it's easier for them to not acknowledge their problems. It's easy to acknowledge problems in a country like China, who's not your friend. Sometimes your allies are the harder ones. And but even China, as you know, that we did trade agreements with China and didn't bring up human rights for a really long time until it became politically correct to do so. So we are just, I always say that we're, actually Representative Congressman Frank, who helped set us up, it was really, we're truth tellers and trying to, put a stake in the ground. And this is what's happening in this country. And the U.S. government can't look away.
And you are nonpartisan, I'm gathering.
Absolutely bipartisan. So there are 9 commissioners, and we're chosen by the president as well as the Republican and Democratic leaders of the House and the Senate. So there is always 5 for one party or the other. And while we have really robust conversations and often, I shouldn't say often disagreements, but plenty of times we have disagreements, it's never on partisan lines. These are just not partisan.
Thank the good Lord. You might be the only institution that has.
We always say that, and it's really, really interesting. We have, for instance, Tony Perkins from FRC, and then we have Anarima Bargova, who is a George Soros fellow. These two see eye to eye on religious freedom, and so we have obviously all Pelosi and Donald Trump appointees that are working together. It really is. These issues go beyond politics. They're human rights. We all should agree, regardless of your political persuasion, that people should have the right to believe or not to believe and follow their faith.
But you bring up the word truth,
Mm-hmm.
and we live in a post-truth era, as you know.
That's a good way of looking at it. We try to be that truth that people can't look away. I mean, to me, that feels like that's mainly what I've been doing the last couple of years, is just pointing.
Okay. Let me ask you this, Nadine. What are some of the biggest threats to religious freedom that you see in the world today? I'm loving the fact that you're nonpartisan and that you're truth tellers. I wrote that down as soon as I got it. So what's some of the big powder keg areas that we could talk about tonight?
Well, I think the first thing is indifference. It's really easy, when you look at the situation with the Uyghur Muslims, for instance, USCIRF was calling out this situation and the situation with Christians in China for years, and no one would pay attention. Like I said, until it got to the point that because of COVID, okay, it's politically correct now to call out China. Well, we would have been better equipped to interact and try to push the international community to stop it as it started, especially with the Uyghurs, and over 1 million in concentration camps. Who knows how many in forced labor? It could be even as many in forced labor. And the international community traded with China and treated them as good neighbors, mm-hmm. and kind of looked away as they were watching this unfold. We've always known they've been tough on Christians and Tibetan Buddhists and others. But it's even gotten worse for Christians, of course, because they've been given a pass to commit all of these atrocities against religious minorities. So now everyone's paying attention. But really that indifference is really the biggest problem that we face is the unwillingness to consider what's before us, because it does make it more difficult for the U.S. government when they acknowledge the atrocities that are happening.
Okay. Let me ask both of you this, and Richard, I'm going to pull you in here too. What's the cause of this persecution? Is it lack of knowledge? Is it fear? Why this desire? We face this throughout the centuries. I mean, there are people who persecuted Christians, annihilated them, tremendous martyrdoms of hundreds of thousands of people. What is it? I mean, from your experiences, what is it you think is at the root cause of that persecution?
Well, I think that's a great question, and there's the simple answer, and there's the more philosophical answer, as you kind of suggest, Father Christopher. So yeah, fear. I would certainly say fear of the other, because in these countries, a lot of times, well, oftentimes, if not always, it's the minority that's going to be persecuted. In some situations, you have a minority government that's persecuting a majority religion, but in most cases, it's the other way around. A lot of it is going to be politically and religiously based, but underlying it all, it is fear. It's fear of the other, which is, I mean, hey, we're humans, we're all humans, and we are subject to these prejudices and biases and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, it's us in the West who it falls on us as incumbent, mm-hmm. to come to their aid and serve as their voice for the voiceless.
Nadine, your thoughts?
Absolutely agree with Rich on this. Fear, lack of the unknown, people that don't have experience with another religious community can easily believe the narrative that they're dangerous, that there are risks to their way of life. And I think, when you look at, for instance, the Middle East is a perfect example, and you look at the countries that USCIRF covers and how they're trending negative. Afghanistan continued to trend negatively. Algeria remained poor. Egypt remain largely static. These are the opening lines of our report for each of these countries. Iran deteriorated, Iraq remains poor, Pakistan worsened, Saudi Arabia remains poor, Syria remained under serious threat, Turkey followed a troubling trajectory. But when you think of those countries are also using that fear, using that lack of understanding of the other religious communities as levers for power. So you see these authoritarian countries taking advantage of these situations in order to, to create an environment where they can control the population. And the disappointing part of all of that is people of faith, whether they be Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, people that truly follow their faith, tend to be wonderful citizens. It's only people that use faith as a lever, like the nationalism, that it becomes a problem. So, they're wrong to think these people are a threat. Really, people following their faith make for wonderful countries, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing is countries where there is religious freedom. You'll see a lot of more prosperity and a better quality of life.
Oh, that's a powerful statement you just made.
One very short point to that same question, Father. You asked the question of why it happens, and that's a very important question. But here in the West and in the United States particularly, I think the more important question is how it can happen.
Yeah.
So the why we've answered, but the how is when good societies, just societies, are sitting on their hands, and that's what the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and IDC aim to do: get off our hands and do something about it.
Well, it's true. And I know for those of us here at OCN, we are about Orthodox advocacy. We are about invigorating those who are in the pews. And we're about evangelism so that we can go out and share what we believe to be the truth. And, the best way to make a better world is to work at it, is to do something about it.
Right.
And you go to the airports, I'm sure you folks have flown there. If you see something, say something. So, it's everywhere. You can't get away from that when the TSA is there. They're saying it all the time. So the question is, what is it going to take to put people in the mood to do something? Because what we're saying here is that we may have to make people a little bit uncomfortable and maybe even put some tax on their seat so they don't sit down too much. So let's talk about future things and what we can do. And I'll ask those of us who are following the program to please post any questions you'd like to post to either Nadine or to Rich, so that we can, when we hit about the halfway point, we'll go into some questions from those listening. We'll come back with you guys.
Great.
So who's going to take that?
So I'll go ahead and start. The question is, what can we do?
Yeah.
So USERF is, our main goal is really making recommendations to the U.S. government. And so in that capacity, I'll say that, the U.S. government needs to prioritize religious freedom and human rights as part of foreign policy. And I know President Biden has promised to make human rights a priority in their foreign policy. But in a country like Syria, I can honestly say religious freedom has never been at the table when we're deciding for a political future, for a political solution to Syria. So if in fact we believe that religious freedom is what allows a society to be formed that's going to have long-term endurance, why would we not want religious freedom at the table? Even if we didn't care personally about religious freedom, we know it makes better societies. We know it's going to make for long-term stability, yet still it's not at the table. Why is that? We know there's why. There's a lot of people at the table that don't want faith. These other countries are a part of the political solution that the U.S. is empowered to be a part of it, that the UN system has empowered to be a part of it. So I think, first of all, for the U.S. government, I think prioritizing in foreign policy is key. I think for us personally, fortunately, the bad news about social media is, of course, it's used by governments to turn against religious minorities, to raise nationalism. There's all sorts of bad things we all know about social media. The good news is it gives you all a platform to tell stories. Yes. And sharing what religious freedom is, sharing what religious persecution looks like. I mean, so many people have gotten out of prisons because of the outcry on social media and the shame it brought the countries. So many people that even haven't been able to be freed have at least felt the world standing with them. So, you have a voice to be able to tell those stories and to bring along your own communities, your friends, your family, to understand how important this freedom is. And that to help educate people, I think, is another thing that can help move the needle.
And I think too, before I go to Rich, one of the ways we could do this, Nadine, is if you know of people who have been under religious persecution and come out of it, that on a future program, which I hope we'll do many of them, that you could share with us, you and Rich could share with us who these people are, if their safety is okay and they want to do this, that we actually share what they went through, how they came out of it, and how they're living now. Because people would say, oh, okay, yeah, I get involved, but I don't see the result of it. Now, I understand the danger and the difficulty, but for future program, I would say that. Rich, let me go to you. Do you want to continue on with what Nadine had offered?
Certainly, I'll just add a bit to it. Your question was a very interesting one. How can we excite the people here in the United States, lawmakers, State Department folks, and even the civilian population? We've never in this country experienced religious persecution to the extent and in the intensity that many have in the Middle East, certainly Christians and other minorities in the Middle East. But one thing we have experienced here in the West, in the United States in particular, is terrorism. We experienced it on 9/11 and before that and still after that. What we can do, and the message we can bring, and to underscore the importance of religious diversity and religious freedom, is to show and to express the fact that where there is diversity, where there is a rich tapestry, these societies are less inclined and less likely to circle the drain of radicalism, if you will. Once you take Christians away from the tapestry in the Middle East, the population will likely tend toward radicalism more because they don't see diversity, they don't see neighbors, they live in an echo chamber at that point with uncontested ideas. The commandment to do unto others as we would want done unto us is infectious. And the neighbors of Christians in the Middle East, be it Syria, Egypt, Lebanon, they do see this, and it does influence them, know it or not. So that's a very important point to bring to the West and to the U.S. lawmakers as well. If we want to avoid this trend toward radicalism, we need to protect the diversity there.
And I think it was Nadine who said that, I wrote it down, people of faith make good citizens. I don't think I've ever heard that before.
Right, and you should, because there's a lot of studies that say that, but that bad news is flies a lot faster than good news does. Yeah. But I just want to add one point to this: is I became involved in a defense of Christians, not because I knew anybody really well yet at the organization I do now, but because I was just so impressed with their work. Just advocating for religious communities and the Yazidis are close to my heart. And as a Christian, I feel like, that is the least of them. And not only were they advocating for Christians, but also for Yazidis and others who had no one to advocate for them. And, this great work on Capitol Hill. So I also want to say, find organizations that stand with you, that believe what you believe, and support them, that are doing good work. Professionals like Rich that are able to be strategic in knowing how to move legislation that could mean, a government moving in the right direction. It could mean Congress making the right choices. And so I do think that's why I personally decided to do so much with them. And now, of course, I've gotten to know them all, and I even love the organization more. But I think, that's another way, is to have people that are doing the work with the persecuted and supporting them and making sure that they're able to continue.
Something to say for that, for sure. Rich, you want to add anything there?
Only that it's a wonderful compliment to have you on our board.
Well, thank you. Great to be on.
Good. So let me look at this for a second. And it's a sensitive subject, but I do want to touch it. Okay. And that is the Ecumenical Patriarchate is located, as you know, in Istanbul, formerly Constantinople. I've gone there many, many times. The first amongst equals is Patriarch Bartholomew, the successor to the Apostle Andrew. He is there, and we know that throughout the centuries, there has been an incredible amount of persecution there. We know that the school of Halki is closed down. I'm wondering if there's any news that we can share with our viewers here tonight about the status over there.
In Turkey, I wish I had good news to share.
Okay.
As I mentioned, Turkey has a troubling trajectory for religious freedom there, that the USCIRF has recommended them to be on the special watch list. Although we did robustly discuss, should we consider them as a country of particular concern? So they are definitely moving in the wrong direction. You have a combination of the government putting pressure on religious groups, but also a growing culture of hostility towards them. Growing anti-Semitism, which is always a red flag for a society, that we're seeing. Increased politically motivated charges of blasphemy. So people that have posted on social media being accused of blasphemy, being arrested, and when communities are targeted, and Christian communities are vandalized or others, they get impunity. There's no consequence for them. Obviously we're seeing, in addition, Turkey outside its own borders in Syria and Iraq, it seems to be the religious communities are the ones targeted, and minorities, ethnic or religious, in both Syria and Iraq, with all sorts of atrocities that have been reported. So unfortunately, it's not a good picture. We feel for the people of Turkey, because we know this isn't the people of Turkey. It's a repressive government that is really limiting their rights to be able to practice their faith. And of course, the Christian communities being able to make their own decisions and choose their own leaders, and being able to meet the needs of their people.
And many of our followers who are Palestinian Orthodox Christians. Wow. And I know the Palestinian people have been in this period of flux for God knows how long with Israeli government. And anything happening there?
Rich, do you want to answer that one?
Yes.
Doesn't matter.
So that's actually not one of our primary focuses at IDC. There's a lot going on there for sure. Persecution of Christian communities in all political demarcations, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. But it's certainly someplace that we certainly could look more into and make more of a primary focus, that's for sure. But we are certainly not unaware of the persecution that does occur, like I said, within all demarcations in the region.
Well, before we go to some questions from our followers this evening, I'll just say that, you said it very well, both of you, that the extremes is where we get into this trouble. Mm-hmm. The either ultra liberal, ultra conservative, and then people live in the middle. They don't live on these extremities, because those, I feel, in my personal opinion, they do out of fear that something may be lost. So we circle the wagons. We protect ourselves. We don't need anybody else. Mm-hmm. And I've said it on broadcasts before. My grandparents came, one from the island of Limnos, the other came from Thrace, and they came to the United States of America. They lived in Astoria, New York. And Astoria, New York had across the street a Jew, a German, a Frenchman, an Italian, and they all got along. Right. They all got along tremendously. And they all had their own faiths, their own customs. They spoke their own language, but they had a respect for one another. They understood that each one was a creation of God. And when we don't have that, I don't know where we're headed. I wonder sometimes. I really wonder. We've got to somehow put tax in people's seats and tell them, look, guys, you said it, Nadine, people of faith make good citizens. Let's do that. Let's go back to those days.
Exactly. Right. No, and I think it's important for the U.S. government to support governments that are those governments, to be able to empower them to grow their societies, to be places where people can practice their faith, and to be more thoughtful about those countries like Pakistan, for instance, that we give a lot of funding to. Nigeria, why are we not connecting that with religious freedom, human rights connections? Why are we not forcing them into, if you're going to take our funds, then we're going to come into some sort of binding agreement. Both countries, we've recommended that we're going to make this progress on this issue. And, we have a lot of power when we're giving money to some of these countries for security, and we don't take advantage of that to ask or demand that if they want our funds, then we need to see some human rights improvements.
But is the government, Nadine and Rich, is the government listening to this, or is it lip service? What do you think?
Well, I would say they certainly are listening. And if they're not, we make them listen. But as we were discussing previously, Father, you and I, before we went live, is the question of inertia. So they're aware of what's going on in all parts of government, in the Congress, in the State Department. But it's that inertia within government that needs to be broken to kind of gain that momentum. To give you a perfect case in point, it took 106 years for the U.S. government to recognize the genocide of Armenians, Greeks, Syriacs, Assyrians, and the list goes on. 106 years, and this was a genocide that Hitler himself cited as the inspiration for the Holocaust. So that just goes to show the inertia that we're dealing with in U.S. government, and it's good people and wonderful organizations like USERF and Chair Maenza herself, who are helping civil society organizations see the light in government, because they are providing that light at the end of the tunnel. They are the watchdogs, and in some sense, the gatekeepers as advisors to all branches of government.
So you folks are involved in speaking truth to power, right?
We are.
And
I
the
think that's
key
a
is
good
you
way
got
of
to
putting
clean
it.
out their ears so they actually hear it. And
Truth.
unfortunately, sometimes you got to show them that these are problems.
Right. Right. And I think a lot of it is about prioritization. You know, I say that a lot of times these issues are like number 12 on a list of 1 to 10, and they never get past 5. So I can go on Capitol Hill and every person I meet with will be 100% in support of everything I say, and yet they do nothing. You know, and so that's kind of the other side of the coin is sure, we want to bring them along, but we also need to lift the urgency of it's a lot easier to take care of these situations before they become number 1. If they become number 1, 2, or 3, or 4, they're probably a genocide or a mass atrocity. We're at the point that we could have done just a tiny bit earlier, it could have stopped that whole trajectory. And so that's really what we find ourselves in this situation where getting power to pay attention to these issues before they become so overwhelming that they demand their attention. And that's the place that's the hardest. And that's why IDC is so good, because they're on Capitol Hill meeting with people, they're meeting with the administration, they're keeping them up to date. So when things start happening, they already have their fingers in, they're able to, you know, try to lift these issues up and move them up in terms of priority, because I feel like priority has a lot to do with it.
Good for you. Okay.
Give you another example, Father, if I might. As a retired Air Force officer, an answer I always get, or I frequently get from congressional staffs or members themselves, they think it's going to resonate with me as an airman, is the fact that, well, for example, in Turkey, you know, we have Incirlik Air Base there, it's too valuable and so on. That just goes to show that inertia that we're dealing with, because there's a very easy answer to that. We have many wonderful islands and places that would love to host an air base in the Eastern Mediterranean, Cyprus, Sardinia, and other places where we already have military assets that could easily be an alternative to you know, having to stage in Turkey. Just to give a brief example of sort of the excuses that we commonly hear that there are very easy answers to.
Well, we don't want you to give up, and we want you to have faith, and we're going to be praying for you. Everyone at OCN, everyone who listens to OCN, we're going to encourage them to continue to pray for you, because that's the strongest weapon we have right now, collective prayer. There are over 2-3 billion Christians in the world today. And you can imagine what would happen if those 3 billion began to be, yes, we have differences. We're not going to, you know, exchange theological dogma and all that. I'm not talking about dogma here. We're talking about life.
Right.
And we had mentioned, I don't mention this program, but programs before, I had the privilege of doing the commentary when the Pope and the Patriarch met in Jerusalem on the 50th anniversary of the lifting of the so-called anathemas, or the excommunication of each church. There was a 50th anniversary, and the Pope and the Patriarch met in front of the Holy Sepulchre. And that was at the time when ISIS was killing, they were just killing so many people. And the Patriarch, because some people actually complained that the Patriarch and the Pope were meeting, the extremists, you know. And the Patriarch said something that was unbelievably true and resonated very well. He said, "Your Holy Father," he said to the Pope, "you know, last time I checked, the blood of the martyrs that is being shed in these countries, in Syria and these other countries, no one's taking a test to see whether they're Catholic or they're Orthodox. Right. They're human beings that are being slaughtered. And we have to somehow raise our collective voice to deal with these things." So I just wanted to share that statement with you. I don't know if that gives you courage, but I was given, you know, tremendous courage by that statement. I thought it was great.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay. Absolutely true. IDC is really an ecumenical organization, not just what was this, you know, on display last night, but ever since our founding, we've been fighting for Orthodox, Catholic, Protestants, and even minorities who aren't necessarily in the Christian family, like Yazidis, to really be the voice for them as they cry out and nobody's listening.
No, good for you guys. Good for you. Well, let's see if we have any questions that we can pose to our great guests tonight.
Yeah, so I'll start with this. I know that you already mentioned before that IDC, that Palestine is not a focus area for you in particular, but I'd still be interested to hear your just general reflections as people that are in that sort of policy conversation space, hearing that conversation. Our friend Maria mentions persecution against Orthodox priests in Jerusalem. Obviously, the fact that it's very difficult for Palestinian Christians to visit these holy sites at all. It'd be much easier for me to visit than for anyone living in Palestine. targeting of churches by extremists among the settlers. These kind of things are happening and are increasing lately. But what's curious is this particular Christian group is largely invisible to most Americans, American Christians, American people. And I don't know if that's because of the sort of historical narrative of Jewish versus Muslim, Israeli, Palestinian, that sort of understanding that that's the divide, and the Christian population there, which is quite large, gets a little bit lost in that conversation or that narrative. But I guess any reflection that you have on that, just from your knowledge, would be interesting, whether you think it's difficult to approach that issue, considering the politically charged nature of the Israel-Palestine issue, whether it's difficult to bring up the plight of Israeli Christians. Maybe it's discouraged to bring that up because of larger conflict narrative. And also, what do we do when there are these historical Christian populations in the Middle East that are sort of erased by the larger conversation about the sort of US Muslim extremism conversation?
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for that question. It's not an easy one, certainly for myself, who admittedly I'm not an expert in the area, but certainly it resonates with me because I also am a member of a smaller Christian community that is often forgotten. But obviously, given my lack of expertise, I would probably defer, directly answering. But I would tell you that I would love to continue the conversation with you, Noel, to learn more about it. Because, like I said, my knowledge on that topic is veneer deep. But to answer the second part of that question, IDC is not an organization that steers away from politically charged or politically sensitive issues. So that's certainly not the reason. It's simply a reason that just very recently, since the defeat of ISIS, that's when our mandate sort of broadened. And so it's been a very short period of time since that broadening has happened. But to go back to the question of politics and we're not sheepish to face these politically charged issues. To give you an example, we're both critical of Iran and Saudi Arabia. Oftentimes in DC, you find think tanks and advocacy groups that criticizes one and is silent on the other. But we're not silent on either. So just to give you an example. But Noel, I would certainly love to continue that conversation into your question more.
Okay. Nadine, do you want to touch that?
Sure. USCIRF, we only cover countries that meet a certain threshold of either a country particular concern or a special watch list. We do monitor other countries. We certainly have not touched that issue. But as a Christian, I'm certainly concerned about persecuted Christians anywhere. And I do believe that you can support Israel's right to exist and still be critical of certain things. And there seems to be a lot of fear about, people are in one camp or another. And I think telling the truth is a good thing, regardless of how it falls. So as Rich, I'm certainly not afraid of the issue. It's just one I haven't spent a whole lot of time on. Although I certainly believe that these Christians should have a right to visit these holy sites and be able to practice their faith the same as I can.
I think we need to form, Nadine and Rich, been thinking about summer camps a lot lately. Kids going, we have 6 children, they've all grown, they went through summer camps. Mm-hmm. And in the camps, they really get on fire for Christ and for doing good. Mm-hmm. I wonder if we need to start a truth camp where you guys could come and speak the truth, because people don't know the truth. They watch television, they go on the internet, and they learn from every Tom, Dick, and Harry what's going on. And that's sometimes their opinions. I remember when I grew up, there were journalists. The journalists reported the truth about the issue. And if they didn't know, they said, well, that's my opinion. But now it's all kinds of people spouting these opinions that are really, I'm sorry, very, very dangerous to people in the world today. So I'm for Truth Camp. How's that?
I'm all in. If we can get members of Congress to come, that's even better.
Well, the politicians have to say things in order to get elected. So,
they come to the Truth Camp and learn, is my point.
That's right. That's good. Okay, Noel, any other questions we have?
Yeah, first I'll sneak this question in, Father Chris. Can you say again when you're visiting the Holy Land?
We'll be there the end of November. We'll go to the Patriarchate, the Ecumenical Patriarchate in Istanbul, and then we'll go from there to the Holy Land. So we'll be spending about 2.5 weeks there on a very strict itinerary that's prepared for us.
So the next question is, what's the approach when there are strong financial interests or other material interests in continuing a relationship with a country that has a bad track record on human rights? You know, obviously very difficult to motivate a switch in policy in that case.
Right. That is why USURF was created. I think partly for that reason is so, you know, we would speak into those situations without considering the bilateral relationship with the country. So I think it's a twofold answer for that. So a country like Saudi Arabia, for instance, that we might have a financial interest with or security interest with, is that at least USURF is calling out the truth and making it so the US government can't look away at the conditions there that are horrific. But I also think in Washington, DC, we have a problem with money. You know, half the think tanks, all the think tanks almost in Washington are funded by foreign governments. Even Christian think tanks are funded. I just found out one that does a lot of decent work is, I believe, funded by Turkey as partially. And so what you have is censoring going on. So you're not having the whole story being told. And of course, all the lobbyists in Washington as well. These you know, rich countries hire the very best lobbyists, former members of Congress, former leaders in the House and Senate, to meet with members of Congress. You know, they hire PR firms that constantly pump out information narrative about them. And so, you know, you have this counter narrative. And so, you know, for me, it's been important for me to go as much as I can to countries and try to see past what the narrative is in Washington, because money has just clouded everyone's judgment. And it's really disappointing.
That root of all evil. We've heard that before, haven't we? Okay. Rich, how about you? You want to respond to that?
Well, yeah, we actually had a great panel this afternoon at the IRF summit, specifically on the title was actually quite. It was let's see if I can remember. It was pretty complex. It was allies, antagonists, and arms sales. That's what it is. It's the 3 A's that address that very question. You know, places where we have financial interests, but also places to whom we give financial support, particularly military support, that have checkered records in terms of religious freedom. So I invite you, and this is a shameless plug, Father. I invite you, if anyone's interested, to go to our Facebook. The full-length panel is there. They can watch it at their leisure.
And can you give us your address, please, for the internet, for your website?
Certainly, yeah. We have a website. It's www.indefenseofchristians.org. All of our media is there. And then also we have our Facebook and Twitter, of course. It's probably more easy to access our videos via the Facebook because it's right on the feed there.
I notice people can sign up for your newsletter that they receive, right?
That is correct. Yep. You can put your name on our mailing list, and you'll be on the newsletter and our weekly updates.
Good for you. Good. Very important. Okay, Noel, one more question, and then I have a final question for both our guests.
Okay, well, I have a difficult one to close us out. I'm interested in your perspective on the situation in Syria. Obviously, the U.S. For the most part, obviously, while combating ISIS, has also taken a strong line against the Assad government. However, some commenters point out that there are Orthodox Christians individually or as organizations that tend to think favorably of the Assad government because of their history of supporting Christian groups there. Also, you know, support for Russia's support of the Assad government, you might say. As a country that at least in its words is you know, speaks out in favor of Christian groups. And so any thoughts you have on that situation?
Yeah, sure. I would love to jump in, and Rich might have something to add as well. But I've spent 7 weeks in Syria in the last 9 months, and so what we are seeing in Syria is Assad has made has a narrative of being the protector of the minorities and of Christians in particular. But, you know, independent studies have shown that, you know, over 60%, 66% of all the houses of worship that were destroyed during the Civil War were destroyed by the regime. And oftentimes they'd even come in after the fact and clean up and try to get in the good graces of the Christians. The fact of the matter is he's made a deal with Christians where he'll protect them if they support him. So that's really not religious freedom. And if they do look like they're working with the opposition in any way, shape, or form, and he finds out, or the regime members find out that they're penalized even more harshly than others would be punished. I just want to say real quickly, there's no shame for Christians. If I was a Christian or a patron or a minister, you know, in a country, and my family or my flock, was under a regime like this, I have no idea what kind of decision I'd make to protect the people that I love. So please understand, that I don't blame the Christians that are in a situation like this. I don't know what I do personally, but I do know that for us to somehow think that's religious freedom and give Assad a pass is really not fair to the Christians who want to be able to not have to support Assad, to be able to keep their families safe. I spent a lot of time in Northeast Syria, and one of the biggest surprises when I visited, and Turkey had just invaded. And so my first time I was there was in November of 2019. And I expected that everybody would be afraid of Turkey. And what everyone was afraid of was the regime coming back. And in Turkey's invasion had given people the fear that means the Northeast won't make it now. And that means if they fall and the regime comes back, they'll be the first ones gone, because they've been under an opposition regime, and that when the regime came back, he would take out the Christians first. So the Christians were terrified, as were a lot of the Arabs, especially the ones who had been involved in governance. So, Assad is no friend of Christians. But like I said, to live in an authoritarian country and be a religious minority, it's a tough thing. And as a believer, I can't judge, and I can't know what it's like to walk in those shoes.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Add anything to that?
I think she nailed it. I mean, she really got all aspects of the issue. I would also just underscore what she already said. Conditional freedom is just a facade of freedom. But again, to those families who are living in government regime held areas, we don't blame them one bit, because what they know of their government right now is that they are the protectors of Christians, and for day-to-day practical purposes, my prayers are with them, and I hope it continues that way. But again, conditional freedom is just what it is.
All right. I'm going to go to both of you just for a second, and then we're going to have to end things because we could go on for some time. Nadine, what's the number one thing that our listeners could do to help this situation, which clearly, you said calling out trust so people can't look away. Wow.
Right. Don't forget our brothers and sisters in Christ. Don't forget those who are suffering, following another faith, that are just trying to be honest and live what they believe. We are so fortunate to be living in a country where we think things are tough, and it is. It's not that we're minimizing our own walk, but we have a lot of people who are suffering around the world, and we have the ability to tell their stories. So my main thing is don't forget them. Pray for them, support groups that help them tell their stories, see how God could use you. We're all called to different things, so no one's really, not saying everyone's called to do what I'm doing and what Rich is doing, but we all could have a role in supporting those that, like the Bible says, that are in chains, our brothers and sisters in chains. So to me, that's a commandment, and so we just have to figure out how God wants us to walk that walk, and just to be faithful in it.
Beautiful. Rich, final word from you.
Well, I want to thank you for having us, and
yes,
thank your viewers really for their interest in this issue that is often ignored. We're going to continue the fight. We won't get tired or discouraged, although sometimes it's tempting to give up. It's too important, because we know Nadine has been to the region a number of times. My family comes from that region. I know from their accounts what it's like. So thank you for your support, and it was a pleasure to be with you.
Very good. Thank you both, Nadine and Rich, for your time, your talent and treasure, which you're using to the benefit of others. Many people use it just for themselves, but clearly you're reaching out, which is what the gospel wants us to do. I'll close with a prayer, and then we have just a few closing remarks that Noel and I will make. Our souls yearn for you in the night, O our God, for your judgments are light on earth. Give us the wisdom to work justice and holiness in this world, so that your name may be glorified. Help us to help others see you in every person that we meet. Help us to create opportunities for all people of the world to know you without the fear of being persecuted. For it is to you we glorify our true guide. Incline your ear and heed us. And remember, Lord, by name, those who are with us this evening, praying with us. Safeguard them in your might. Amen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We hope you'll stay safe and you'll keep faith alive in your home, in your city, your country, and hopefully then through the world. Thank you for supporting myocn.net. Your support allows us to have wind in the wings of the angels, as we say, to carry the message of Christ to the world. Thank you for supporting us and allowing us to deliver that message anytime, anywhere, and at any time throughout the world. God bless you all. Have a good night.